For years, Turkey fought to get back into the F-35 program after being expelled in 2019 for buying Russia's S-400 air defense system. Now, after President Trump signaled at the NATO summit in Ankara that Washington is finally ready to reverse that ban and sell Turkey the jet it has wanted for over half a decade, the deal that was supposed to cement Turkey's place at the heart of the alliance is instead doing something almost nobody in Ankara expected. It's reopening exactly the trust questions Turkey spent years trying to bury. Multiple NATO allies and one non-NATO power watching from just outside the alliance's borders are reportedly raising serious concerns behind closed doors about what handing Ankara the West's most advanced stealth fighter actually means for the alliance's own security. Before you understand how a deal meant to reward Turkey's loyalty ended up putting that loyalty on trial, you need to understand exactly what was promised, who objected, and why the fallout from this single decision may end up reshaping how NATO's newest and most unpredictable member is treated for years to come. Let's start with what was actually said, because the language matters enormously here. At the NATO summit in Ankara, President Trump stood beside President Erdogan and told reporters that Turkey has been, in many ways, much more loyal than other countries that we think would be loyal. A strikingly direct statement given Turkey's long, complicated history of straddling the line between NATO membership and deepening military ties with Moscow. Trump added that a decision on lifting sanctions and moving forward with F-35 sales was something the administration would certainly consider. Language that, according to Turkish officials briefed on the matter, effectively signaled the deal was close to done. Erdogan, for his part, wasted no time capitalizing on the moment, publicly stating that he had been promised an initial batch of jets and framing the announcement as a personal diplomatic win secured directly through his relationship with Trump. This is where the story stops being a routine defense procurement update and becomes something with real teeth, because the F-35 ban was never simply a bureaucratic formality. It was imposed in 2019 for a specific and very deliberate reason. When Turkey purchased Russia's S-400 air defense system, U.S. officials warned at the time that operating the S-400 alongside the F-35 would allow Russian technicians and intelligence services to study the stealth fighter's radar signature and electronic systems up close, potentially handing Moscow the ability to detect and track the very aircraft the F-35 was designed to make invisible to enemy radar. That warning came directly from the highest levels of the American defense establishment, and it wasn't walked back or softened over the following 6 years. So when Trump signaled a willingness to reverse the ban without Turkey actually giving up the S-400 system itself, according to several reports on the ongoing policy review, it wasn't just a diplomatic gesture. It was a reversal of a core security judgment the Pentagon had defended for years, and that reversal is exactly what triggered the alarm now spreading through Allied capitals. Now I want to show you something that captures how quickly this alarm spread. Within days of Trump's comments in Ankara, U.S. lawmakers who had already warned the administration in late June that selling Turkey the jets could represent a security threat began pushing back publicly, pointing directly at Ankara's continued defense ties with Moscow as the unresolved problem nobody had actually fixed. This wasn't a fringe objection from a handful of skeptics. It reflected a bipartisan concern rooted in the same technical argument that justified the original ban, and it signaled that any deal moving forward would face real resistance not from Turkey's rivals abroad, but from inside the halls of the U.S. government itself. Let's look at where the sharpest objection actually came from, because it didn't come from inside NATO at all. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reportedly warned directly against giving the F-35 to Turkey, a striking intervention from a country that isn't even a NATO member, but that operates its own fleet of F-35s and has an enormous strategic interest in who else in the region gets access to the same platform. Israel's concern here is straightforward and, according to regional defense analysts, entirely rational from Jerusalem's perspective. Erdogan has become one of the most vocally anti-Israel leaders in the region over the past 2 years, and Turkey's deepening rhetorical and political support for groups Israel considers direct threats to its security makes the idea of Ankara operating the same stealth aircraft used by the Israeli Air Force deeply uncomfortable for Israeli planners, regardless of Turkey's NATO membership. This is where the story becomes genuinely complicated, because it forces the United States into an uncomfortable position between two partners. It has spent years trying to keep aligned, even as those two partners drift further apart from each other. According to reporting from the Ankara summit, despite Netanyahu's public warning, Trump did not walk back his openness to the deal, telling reporters he had a great relationship with Erdogan, and calling the F-35 the best plane by far. Analysts tracking the relationship describe this as a genuinely rare moment where Washington appeared willing to prioritize its bilateral relationship with Ankara over a direct public objection from Israel, a dynamic that several Israeli commentators have described as evidence that Turkey's regional standing is rising in Washington's eyes, even as its rhetoric toward Israel grows more hostile. Let's zoom out to the technical questions nobody has actually answered yet, because this is where the deal's internal contradictions really start to show. According to reporting on the administration's internal review, officials have spent weeks examining possible legal pathways to reconcile Turkey's continued possession of the S-400 with the statutory restrictions that still, on paper, prohibit F-35 transfers to any country operating the Russian system. The frameworks reportedly under consideration include physically relocating the S-400 batteries to a third country, or structuring the sale as a restricted foreign military sales arrangement designed to limit Turkish access to the jet's most sensitive systems. Neither of these options is simple. Relocating an active air defense system that Turkey paid billions of dollars for and has spent years integrating into its own military doctrine is not something Ankara has shown any public willingness to actually do. And a restricted F-35, stripped of full access to its most advanced capabilities, risks giving Turkey a watered-down version of the jet while still exposing the broader program to exactly the intelligence risk the original ban was designed to prevent, an outcome that satisfies essentially nobody. This is exactly the kind of unresolved contradiction that has allied defense ministries reportedly nervous. Several NATO member states, according to officials familiar with alliance discussions, have quietly raised concerns that reversing the ban without a genuine resolution to the S-400 problem sets a precedent that undermines the entire logic of collective technology security within the alliance. If Turkey can operate Russian air defense systems and still gain access to the West's most sensitive fighter platform through political pressure and personal diplomatic relationships, it raises an uncomfortable question for every other NATO member currently being asked to align its own procurement decisions strictly with alliance security guidelines. Why maintain strict compliance if political relationships can simply override the rules when it's convenient? Let's bring in Greece, because Ankara's tensions with Athens add yet another layer of complexity that rarely gets enough attention in coverage of this story. Turkey and Greece have a long, tense history of disputes over Aegean airspace, maritime boundaries, and Cyprus. Disputes that have occasionally brought the two NATO allies dangerously close to direct military confrontation with each other, not with any external adversary. Greek officials have historically pushed back hard against any American move that meaningfully strengthens Turkey's air power advantage in the eastern Mediterranean, and reports indicate Greece was specifically named among the parties whose objections helped contribute to years of delay on the original F-35 restoration effort. A renewed push to arm Turkey with fifth-generation stealth fighters, even framed purely as a NATO cohesion measure against Russia, inevitably reads very differently in Athens, where the more immediate strategic concern has never been Moscow, but the country's own complicated neighbor across the Aegean. Now, let's bring in the broader alliance perspective, because NATO's own internal messaging around this summit adds an ironic layer to the entire situation. According to reporting from the Ankara summit, NATO unveiled new multinational procurement initiatives specifically designed to demonstrate that increased European defense spending was translating into real, coordinated military capability, a central theme of the entire gathering. Alliance officials spent the summit trying to project unity and burden sharing to Washington. Against that backdrop, a bilateral U.S.-Turkey F-35 deal negotiated primarily through personal rapport between two leaders over the explicit objections of a key regional security partner and quiet unease among several member states sits awkwardly next to the alliance's own stated goal of coordinated, rules-based defense cooperation. Some NATO diplomats reportedly view the optics here as genuinely damaging, an alliance trying to prove its systems work smoothly overshadowed by a headline-grabbing bilateral deal that appears to bypass exactly the kind of structured multilateral process NATO was simultaneously trying to showcase. So how much of this alarm is actually justified versus predictable friction that tends to accompany any major defense deal involving Turkey? This is where we need real skepticism, because Turkey's relationship with the F-35 program and with NATO, more broadly, has been defined by cycles of crisis and resolution for years, without ever actually breaking down completely. A senior transatlantic security analyst who has tracked the Turkey-NATO relationship for over a decade offered an important counterpoint to the more alarmist framing of this story. Turkey has always operated as NATO's most independently minded member, maintaining its own relationship with Moscow even while hosting critical NATO infrastructure and maintaining the alliance's second-largest standing army. This analyst argued that the current friction over the F-35 deal looks less like a fundamental crisis of loyalty and more like the same negotiating pattern that has defined U.S.-Turkey relations for years. Ankara leveraging its strategic position to extract concessions from Washington, allies expressing predictable discomfort, and the relationship ultimately continuing because neither side can actually afford a genuine rupture, given Turkey's control over the Bosphorus Straits, its hosting of critical American air bases, and its outsized role in managing NATO's southern and eastern flanks simultaneously. The same analyst raised a further point worth taking seriously. Much of the loudest objection to this deal is coming from parties with their own separate strategic interest in seeing it fail, particularly Israel, whose relationship with Erdogan has deteriorated for reasons entirely unrelated to the technical S-400 concerns that originally justified the ban. This doesn't mean Israel's underlying security concern about Ankara's regional posture is invalid, but it does mean the objection should be understood partly as a reflection of the broader Erdogan-Netanyahu rivalry, rather than purely as a neutral technical assessment of NATO security risk, a distinction that matters when trying to gauge how much this controversy will actually derail the deal versus simply generate noise around it. This is the real tension sitting at the center of this story, and it deserves to be held honestly. On one hand, the core technical objection that justified the original 2019 ban, the risk that Turkey's S-400 system could compromise F-35 stealth technology for Russian intelligence services, has never actually been resolved. And reversing the ban without solving that problem represents a genuine and substantive security question, not simply allied squabbling. On the other hand, Turkey's relationship with NATO has weathered comparable crises before, from its invasion of northern Syria to its purchase of the S-400 in the first place, and each time, the alliance's structural need for Turkey's geographic position and military weight has ultimately outweighed the political friction generated by Ankara's independence streak. What may genuinely be different this time is the specific combination of factors converging simultaneously. A U.S. president willing to override a formal congressional restriction based primarily on personal diplomatic rapport, an unresolved technical security concern nobody has actually fixed, a public and unusually direct objection from a non-NATO partner with its own F-35 fleet and its own worsening relationship with Ankara, and a broader alliance summit explicitly trying to project the kind of rules-based coordinated defense cooperation that this exact deal appears to sidestep. Individually, none of these tensions would likely be enough to derail years of accumulated strategic interdependence between Washington and Ankara. Together, according to the analysts most closely watching this story, they represent exactly the kind of friction that, even if it doesn't sink the deal outright, could leave a lasting mark on how much other NATO members are willing to trust Turkey with the alliance's most sensitive shared technology going forward. Let's go back to that moment in Ankara. Trump and Erdogan standing side by side, one calling the other much more loyal than other countries that we think would be loyal. That single sentence captures exactly why this deal has generated so much unease well beyond the technical S-400 debate. Loyalty within an alliance built on collective defense isn't supposed to be measured through personal rapport between two leaders at a single summit. It's supposed to be demonstrated through consistent alignment on the hard security questions, exactly the kind of question this F-35 decision was designed to test in the first place. Whether Ankara ultimately proves that trust justified, or whether this deal becomes the moment Allied capitals start quietly reassessing exactly how far they're willing to extend that trust going forward, the uncomfortable truth is that Turkey's own government seems to have handed its critics and its rivals the exact opening they needed simply by accepting a deal that never actually resolved the concern that got it banned in the first place. Whether this controversy ultimately fades the way previous Turkey-NATO friction points have faded, absorbed by the alliance's deeper strategic need for Ankara's geography and military weight, or whether it marks a genuine turning point in how much unchecked trust Turkey has extended within the alliance's most sensitive defense programs, one thing already seems clear from everything reported so far. A deal designed to finally put years of mistrust to rest has instead placed that mistrust back at the center of the conversation, at the exact moment NATO was trying to project total unity to the rest of the world. If you want to keep following exactly how this F-35 controversy develops between Washington, Ankara, and the rest of NATO, make sure you subscribe, because this story is moving fast, and we will be tracking every new development the moment it breaks.